Sisters and brothers, ladies and gentlemen, friends, neighbors, comrades, all citizens of the world, wherever you're going, wherever you've been, and wherever you're at, we welcome you to the Live from the Heartland show here on YouTube. New episodes air every Friday at 9 a.m. Central Time with individual interviews posted throughout the following week. I'm your host, Michael James, encouraging you to take the chain from the brain to get back in the people's game, because it's time to move from the lower level to the higher, from the shallower to the deeper, from the one-sided to the many, and from the abstract to the concrete. So without further ado, let's get it on. Welcome all you friends, all you neighbors, all you citizens of the world, wherever you are, wherever you've been, wherever you're going. We're glad that you've tuned in to Live from the Heartland. This is for the week of August 24th, and we are recording it at the beginning of the Democratic Convention. There's a lot of excitement in my own family. There were members of the family trying to get to Chicago yesterday, and the weather held that plane back, and it had a lot of people headed for the Democratic Convention. They were scurrying around thinking about, could they take a train, rent a car? It will be an exciting week with a lot of action, a lot of politics, a lot of hope and joy, hopefully. And we will talk more about it next week when we'll have people who were there and have analyzed it a bit. For this week, we're going to have a couple of guests. Many of you are used to having me bring on a lot of my old left-wing pals. I've got a couple of young people coming on this week. We're going to have Emma Brown, who is involved with Annunciation House in El Paso, Texas, and she's going to talk about migrants and immigrants and people coming across the border and what that's all about. And then we're going to have the young writer, Josh Terry, who I first met when we would be at Twin Peaks shows, and most recently, he interviewed me for WTTW. He's doing their new email newsletter, I guess, for subscribers. We'll hear more about that. I hope you're all doing well out there, and I hope that you're paying attention to politics, gearing up for a fall of serious political activity to bring about a different kind of regime than the other possibility might be. And with that said, let's hear a little bit of music that engineer Hal James will pick out, and we'll be back with our first guest, Emma Brown.
Alberto hits his brother on the back of the head. Looks to the north as he starts to get up. His brother, still sleepy, grumbles it's not light yet. If you want a new life, what's a few minutes wait? Darkness on the road and over the land, into the laws and out of the hands, from those with so much and no show of heart. You think it'd be crazy to ask for a small part.
Okay, everybody, welcome to Live from the Heartland again. I'm Michael James, and regular listeners to our show know that El Paso is another city besides Chicago that comes up a lot. I've been going down there since 2002 to participate in basketball in the barrio, in the Segundo Barrio, which merges basketball for young people with border culture. And we've talked to people like Beto O'Rourke and Russ Bradford and Steve Yellen. And El Paso is a wonderful city. It's an interesting place. And while I was at the Glenwood Avenue Arts Fest, one of the people who was looking at my photographs, which had a label, El Paso, told me that she was from El Paso. And when she told me what she did there, I said, well, how would you like to come on the Live from the Heartland show? And so I present to you all the one and only Emma Brown. And hello to you, Emma Brown.
Hi, hello.
So you told me that you work for Annunciation House now, and that you are very much involved with what refugees are experiencing on the border. How about you tell us a little bit about what's going on the border and what has changed on the border?
Sure. Well, that's a big question. And first of all, I just wanted to be clear that I worked for Annunciation House for about 2 years, since around 2021. And I just finished a contract with them. So at this time, I am not employed by them, and I don't speak as a representative of them or anything like that. But for the past 2 years, my entire life was pretty much dedicated to coordinating shelters for asylum seekers on behalf of Annunciation House. Because as people are pretty well aware, El Paso is a major crossing point for refugees, asylum seekers who are coming up from Mexico, but also increasingly countries like Venezuela, Colombia, Central and South American countries, as well as the occasional people who are finding their way over from Turkey, China, Ukraine, and many of those people bottleneck in Ciudad Juarez and then come through El Paso. And Annunciation House, for more than 4.5 decades, has tried to be a respite center for people like that during the time that they're passing through El Paso.
Emma, how did you come to end up in El Paso and working in this area of, I guess, human rights and social justice issues?
I came to El Paso specifically to volunteer for Annunciation House as a full-time volunteer, which I did because I had a pre-existing interest in immigration, and I had volunteered for 3 months for another organization in the UK that today is called Choose Love and used to be called Help Refugees. It was located in the north of France in Calais. And I learned a lot about global immigration at that time. And I said, wow, I really want to go back to my own country that I'm a citizen of and learn about what's affecting immigration at the U.S.-Mexico border.
Well, let me follow up on that global immigration, because I think that what probably will become an issue in the upcoming presidential election here in the States is immigration. I mean, the Republicans use it. The Democrats use it in some ways. There's been a pretty big failure over a number of years to deal with it. But it's not just an issue here on the southern border of the United States. It's a global issue, as you say. And I wondered if someone who's very much in tune with the immigration question, if you could give us a little paragraph, so to speak, about the global situation on immigration and perhaps the causes.
Oh my goodness. It's a big question. Where to start? The people often ask me about how European immigration is different from U.S.-Mexico immigration. And the thing is that on the surface, there are many differences about what's happening, but at the root level, it's always the same issue. Truly, at the end of the day, it just stems from the consequences that we see down the line from imperialism, from colonialism, from extracting resources for generations from other countries, and then turning around and being surprised when people from those countries, are seeking the benefits that we experience living in so-called first world countries.
What's it like for the people who are coming to the border? And you probably were there when there was some change, when Biden changed the regulations and the terms of whatever's going on, people getting into the country or not. What's the daily experience people have? What do you observe? What do you want to call people's attention to?
Well, the biggest thing that you mentioned was the change right now, because I've only been working for Annunciation House for like a tiny portion of their existence. And I can tell that for many, many years, it was like the role of immigration in El Paso was very different, and it was far more low key. The border was less militarized, and for instance, Annunciation House mostly was just a single, very simple little house run by Catholic students who gave shelter to undocumented day laborers. But just in the past decade, or even in the past like 4 or 5 years, the immigration landscape has changed so rapidly, and everybody is trying to keep up, including like Department of Homeland Security is trying to keep up, and the shelters are trying to keep up, because the kinds of people migrating have changed and increased. And the way that legislation changes about who is permitted to cross the border and when and how, just since I've been there in the past 2 years, feels like it gives you whiplash, because the different administrations' responses totally change people's lives while they're trying to cross. And yes, if you want to talk about like a really typical experience for somebody at this current point in time, Biden's administration created the CBP-1 app, which honestly I think is well-intentioned and a creative way for people to be able to use their phone that they have to schedule a meeting with immigration that allows them to come through in an orderly manner. However, it simply isn't logistically possible for them to have enough meetings for the amount of people who want to cross. And there are other kinds of structural barriers in place. And at the end of the day, if you are really fleeing an unstable situation in your country, it's not safe for you to wait sometimes months and months, especially if you're a vulnerable non-Mexican in Ciudad Juarez, where you're extremely susceptible to trafficking and kidnapping. Those people end up waiting months and months trying to get a CBP-1 appointment, trying to do things so-called the right way. And very often, ultimately, one too many things go wrong for them in Juarez, where the sheltered conditions are not super great, and they choose to just take a chance and cross the river and try to go over the barbed wire.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of those pictures. I had someone who works in Juarez, lives in El Paso, tell me when I was just recently there in June, that while we are not happy with the president's new directives around the border, we saw it as, this person actually saw it as something that needed to happen now for the election, but certainly would like to see a better situation. And I'm wondering if you were in charge of the border, what changes you might encourage to happen. If that's too big a question, we'll go on to something else. But I mean, what would the masses of people who are concerned be calling for our next president? Hopefully, and it's not the guy who once was the president.
Oh man, it's such a good question. Because it's just a rock and a hard place, because we want politicians to understand that like when they see immigration and they see the border as merely a political tool, a way to try to prove to their voters that they are hard or that they're, supportive of immigrants. It has really real consequences for people who have no idea that they are being, used kind of as political pawns. We meet all of these people, for instance, who have come to our shelter, and then they hear about Greg Abbott's state busing program, where he will bus people out of El Paso into sanctuary cities.
We have a lot of those folks in Chicago.
Yeah. Yes, you do. You absolutely do. Abbott charters those buses, pays for them to arrive in Chicago in a chaotic manner that doesn't involve a lot of planning to make things more difficult for you. And I've talked to so many of those families who have no idea what's going on with the political situation in America, and they just want to go to a city where they hear that maybe somebody's going to give them a chance, where they might be able to get into a shelter, and somebody will, let them talk to a pro bono immigration lawyer for 2 seconds to tell them what the heck all of this paperwork means. So that's to say, I would try to remind politicians that they're really crafting policies that have an impact on actual people's lives at the end of the day. But I'm not sure how useful that is to say to a politician.
Yeah, that kind of goes in one ear, comes out the other. While you were talking, you mentioned how the border in the past was less militarized. And one of the things that I've observed over the last 20 some odd years of going down to El Paso every year and going to Juarez a lot is, when I first went down, there were actually I had met people who crossed the border every day. They come to work in El Paso, they go back. That's become much more difficult. And there is whereas you could really just see across the Rio Grande, Rio Bravo River to Juarez from El Paso. Now there is this steel fence that goes on for mile after mile. I don't know who paid for it, if it's a thing that the orange guy put through. I know there's talk of trying to continue to build it, but it's very sad. What other ways besides those fences do you see the militarization of the border?
Wow. Well, the fence is just the physical manifestation of border policy, and it is really affects your mental state when you're in El Paso, I think. And I think for people who live there for a long time, it just becomes noise that they don't think about anymore. But when you visit for the first time, you're like, wow, something is really going on in this place, because you can't just go about your life and live normally without seeing the border wall and seeing the activity of Border Patrol every day all around you. But that is also just the most surface level thing. But like really the border is enforced in much more insidious ways, in the paperwork, in the withholding of benefits from asylum seekers, the ways that they come in and are barely educated about what's happening to them. So of course they're going to miss their court dates. Of course they're going to struggle to pay for a lawyer. I often think that it's really those less exciting, less visible things that are the biggest barriers to people. It's the fact that, like, to fill out the asylum application, it has to be submitted in English, which means that you have to work with a lawyer to translate it.
Yeah. Emma Brown, let me ask you, how do you think the people of El Paso have responded? I'm sure there's a lot of people doing good and contributing. I'm sure there are people who are angry and PO'd. Can you give us a little sense of what you see among the population of your fellow El Pasoans?
I think El Pasoans are really special. The people who really stick around there for generations. Certainly a lot of people are just going about their lives and they don't care about the border at all, or, they would rather it not, cause them so many problems all the time and have the traffic to go to Juarez back up I-10 all the time. But every time that there's a surge in immigration, and 2 winters ago at Christmas time, there was a surge, and shelters couldn't hold people. People ended up on the street.
Yeah.
Regular people who don't know anything about immigration will turn out and try to help people. So that's what I've seen.
That's good to hear. I love El Paso, and I like visiting there. We met at my photo booth at the Glenwood Avenue Arts Fair here in Chicago's Rogers Park. And one of the things that I learned about you is that you are an artist yourself. And I wondered if in the remaining minute or so we have, if you'd like to just tell us a little bit about the artwork you do and maybe your hopes and dreams for the future.
Thank you. It's kind of you to mention that. But yes, I'm an artist. I do a variety of things, but what I've kept up with during the past couple of years, while being extremely busy doing this other thing I never expected to do, working in shelters, the main thing I do is that I just carry a camera wherever I go, and I take photographs. And I would really like to develop a body of work about my experience in El Paso, but man, I'm still thinking about it.
Well, that's good. Do you have a website or anything you'd like to, or Instagram you'd like to share with the viewers and listeners?
Sure, thank you. My Instagram is Instagrandma Brown, and my name is Emma Brown, and I have a website that is called EmmaBrownMakesArt.com. But may I also say, if anybody hears this and their interest is piqued in talking about immigration in El Paso, please look up Annunciation House. It's hard to spell, but if you Google it enough, you can find it. Annunciation House.
No, it's good. I looked it up. It said, in a gospel spirit of service and solidarity, we accompany the migrant, refugee, and economically vulnerable peoples of the border region through hospitality, advocacy, and education. We place ourselves among these poor so as to live our faith and transform our understanding of what constitutes more just relation. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I'm really glad that we got to meet each other. I don't know how long you'll be in Chicago, but I know you're going back to El Paso, and maybe I'll see you down there next year at Basketball in the Barrio over at the Armejo Center in the wonderful Segundo Barrio. Y mucho gusto y gracias.
Thank you.
Okay, everybody else, stay tuned. We're going to play a little music, and I'm not sure what it is, but I know it'll be good. And we'll be right back with our next guest on Live from the Heartland for the week of August 24th in the year 2024. Welcome back to Live from the Heartland for August 24th. I'm Michael James, and our next guest is a young fellow named Josh Terry, who I was really glad to meet when we would both be at Twin Peaks shows. He is a writer. He worked for the Red Eye. He's written for a lot of places. So good day to you, Josh, and thanks for coming on.
Hey, Michael, it's great to be back on the show. I remember the last time I was on, it was February of 2020 when we were recording in person at the WLUW offices. So it's good to be back.
It's good. I should have looked at that show before I did this so I could get reminded of what we covered then. But yeah, those were good times when we were doing the show from the WLUW studios. When the COVID hit, we ended up doing it by Zoom from home, and it has permitted us to go anywhere in the world pretty much and do interviews with folks. But you and I, we ran into each other recently, and I was bugging you to come on and talk, and you actually turned the tables on me.
Right.
And interviewed me for WTTW. What's that about? That's your new job, and why did you interview?
Yeah, so, we met when I was working for the Red Eye Chicago. And that was from, I think it might have been 2016, 2015 when we met. And, I've had quite a few jobs since then. Online journalism, you can work for a lot of places in less than a decade. So after Red Eye Chicago, I worked for a national publication called Vice for 4 years. And then I had a few other freelance gigs. And, I think around 2022, I decided that, while a lot of the writing I was doing was sort of kind of, for freelance clients and marketing, kind of non-really glamorous things instead of like, print magazine stories or print newspaper stories, that what I love to do. And so I realized that I kind of needed my own space to write about the music that I really liked, and, kind of had a no pressure, no expectations kind of thing for me to just write and see if it resonates. And I started my own newsletter, and I called it No Expectations. I couldn't really figure out a name and kind of landed on that. It is a Rolling Stones song.
A good one.
It was sort of more of a joke of like, what, this is just going to be a fun thing for me, and only do it if it remains fun. And then I started it, and it did well. It's a email newsletter that's once a week, and I did it for a year while freelancing for a bunch of different places. And then I was reached out to by WTTW, and they were launching their own newsletter and wanted someone with experience running one to help them launch it. And I've been with WTTW News since May, and it's been fantastic. I knew while I'd been doing the freelance thing for a while, I knew that I wanted my next full-time job to be in Chicago. I love.
Hopefully, it has benefits too.
Well, it's union. It's the best benefits I've had being a journalist. So I'm a card-carrying SAG-AFTRA member now. So it feels.
Me too.
Yeah.
Right on,
yeah.
brother.
So it's been really awesome. And, WTTW has been such an amazing institution for a very, very long time. I know you have been on the show on Chicago Tonight, and I know you have. I used to employ some people who work in the office, as far as I'm aware.
We did have some people ended up there.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's been a dream come true. And the people I work with have been so lovely. And it's just like one of the most supportive working environments I've ever been in. And one of the reasons why it took me so long to come back on the show is that I wanted to be able to talk about the new newsletter that WTTW has launched. It's called Daily Chicagoan, and it runs Monday through Saturday. And it's sort of, it'll be a destination for our reporting at WTTW, but it's also a way to kind of talk about arts, culture, events, food, sort of the grab bag of everything great about the city. And we launched last week, and we're busy right now with the DNC happening this week, but I'm happy to take a good half hour to talk to you guys today.
Do you think you have the time not only to do the new Daily Chicagoan for WTTW and No Expectations? Are you paying enough attention to your No Expectations blog and site?
Yeah, I mean, it has been. So the good thing about this WTTW job is that I'm less reporting and writing a ton for them. I'm more becoming a cheerleader for the reporters and writers on staff. I have written a few things for the website, but mainly my job is to sort of compile everything that WTTW News does into this daily newsletter. And I write a few things here and there for it. The good thing about my newsletter is that it's only once a week. And since I'm the boss, I can take a week off if things get really busy. But so far, it's been a really good balance. I love my job, and I love being able to take time, like on nights and weekends, to write my newsletter. It's been good. That was kind of a huge worry when I took this job, but so far it's been really, really great.
Josh Terry, let me ask you a little bit about yourself. Where did you come from, and what are some of the things that contributed to your interest in music and becoming a writer?
Well, I'm originally from Michigan. I grew up in West Michigan. My dad was a musician growing up. He is still a musician, but when he was growing up, he always had guitars around. He was always playing music. And I think, the thing that, as I'm sure you're aware with your children, is that when someone is a musical person, and especially a father figure, chances are you're going to try to figure out your own taste. It's not just going to be James Taylor and Jackson Brown, which is what my dad was playing. I wanted to kind of dig a little deeper and find things that really felt like me. And I was always just, loved records, loved writing about music. And but it was never something that I really thought of as a career until maybe my senior year of college. I had actually studied psychology and was applying to grad schools. And, as far as writing about music, my biggest aspirations was to maybe have a website where I would post a song and be like, hey, check out this song. And, I had no idea of what sort of work would go into writing about music, go into journalism, any of that stuff. But I needed an internship for my minor at Loyola Chicago. I needed an internship for my English minor, and I ended up getting an internship at the AV Club Onion, which is a pop culture satirical news website. And I expected the internship to be sort of like an administrative role. I expected to be grabbing coffee and filling out spreadsheets. But my first day, they were like, all right, write 3 blogs by noon. And it was a real trial by fire. And it was one of the scariest days of my life that first day. But I loved it. And I kind of stopped applying for grad schools and realized that I would be much happier if I tried to freelance write immediately after graduation. And that was, I graduated college in 2013, and it's been almost 12 years, and I'm still here. So it feels really good.
Well, you were talking about listening to your dad's tunes when you were growing up. And I have a lot of kids, but the two youngest are Katie and Lake, Jack Henry James, and Hal Coltrane, Katie and James. And I remember when they listened to a lot of Otis Redding. And I'm sure that there are a lot of young people out there who are into music now and are into bands who got their footing and a good foundation from their parents listening to tunes in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and even the 90s and beyond, because we're getting older on this end.
I'm eternally grateful to my parents for, even if our tastes were different growing up, they've been so great on nurturing every single interest. And I think that's kind of the most important thing a parent can do, is to kind of let their kids pursue what they're passionate about.
Well, let me throw at you your hit, your take, some of your views on the Chicago music scene. Bands that you've liked, bands that you think are important. We could go on about clubs and places and festivals and what's up, what's down. Riff a little bit on some of that.
Well, it's very funny. When I started writing about Chicago music, I was around the same age as a lot of the bands starting. I'm maybe a year or two older than your son, Cadian, and it was really great to see all the youthful bands and also be that age myself, kind of documenting it, having the energy to go to like 3 or 4 shows a week and seeing all these people who are my peers and sometimes even younger than me, like, make great art and thrive in this city. The thing about what makes a good music community is it's a kind of a multi-part system. Like, one, the most important thing, and this is kind of across the country, you need cheap rent. And Chicago, for the longest time, compared to other cities, had cheap rent where artists could live. 2, you need a lot of independent small venues for these bands to play. Chicago has these in multitudes. We have the Hideout, we have Shuba's, we have Sleeping Village, which is a relatively new venue. We have about a couple dozen venues that aren't owned by these big multinational corporations, where bands can freely play and develop their talent and develop an audience. That's also just incredibly important. Another thing is that while this is something that affects me personally, you do need sort of an independent, and you need a thriving local media ecosystem to kind of document and support these artists. And Chicago does have that, but by my count, there is only one full-time employed music journalist at a paper, and that's Lior Galil at the Chicago Reader. There needs to be more. I used to be one of them, but now in Chicago, there isn't really. The arts and culture budgets are usually the first things that get cut. But, Chicago being one of the major cities in the country, you're always going to get an influx of talent. And as long as rents stay low, you're always going to get boundary pushing artists that make great art. And another thing that I think is unique to Chicago, beyond these sort of structural things like the cheap rent, the independent venues, is that I think there is, compared to other scenes like New York or LA, there's like a major cross-pollination of artists. Take, for instance, Twin Peaks. They were an indie rock band, but they were really close with Chance the Rapper in the hip hop community. Same in the 90s, there was a huge kind of merging of the improvisational jazz communities and the indie rock communities. And now we're seeing, just so many younger bands pop up that are making way cooler sounds than me and my friends were making when we were that age. There's young bands like Freako, and there's young bands like Free Range and Lifeguard and Horse Girl. And these are all people who are, 5 to 10 years younger than me. And they're like listening to way cooler records than I did at that time.
That's good. I was going to ask you about the crossover in the mix. I heard a report recently that was, I can't remember the details, but I really like the notion of a cross-pollination, cross-fertilization. And, Chicago is such a wonderful place in the sense that we have larger concentrations of more diverse racial, ethnic, religious groups probably than anywhere in the country. One of my older sons would argue that Queens, New York beats us out. But in any event, we have a lot of stuff. And I'm not as familiar with what's going on besides the blues scene, which I used to pay more attention to various jazz, what's going on in Latino music. And I don't know if there's any Asian influence, how much overlap. You mentioned Twin Peaks, knowing Chance the Rapper. I'm not going to go into that story about the two of them. Elaborate a little bit more on the potential and the actual occurrence of this cross-cultural mix that we have and should embrace and advance in this wonderful city of ours.
Yeah, I mean, you're seeing it becoming much more diverse since even when I started out. And I think that there is a welcoming vibe in this city, especially with the artists, that makes it that is making the music more interesting. Like living in Rogers Park and living in Chicago, that the best of this city is when we're all included. And we're seeing, like some of the most popular local music festivals are Latino music festivals. And you're seeing bands like Dos Santos and Divino Nino, who are kind of breaking into kind of the traditional, more whiter indie rock spaces. And I think that's amazing. And I think you're seeing like other bands like listen to not just music in Chicago, but music from around the world. And you're seeing these sounds kind of becoming incorporated into these recordings. And I think that's just beautiful. And I think that the only way for innovation is to sort of take as much of a global, holistic view on music. Like, let's not just use the Western canon. Let's look deeper and let's dig deeper to find more interesting sounds.
Well, Josh Cherry, you have a really good perspective. I like that a lot. You talked earlier about independent venues, and that was something I was going to ask about. If there was a proliferation of small clubs, it seems like more and more everywhere has music on Saturday night, or people playing and people setting up. And then you did mention that as opposed to multinational corporations. I'm wondering about the influence of the multinational corporations. There used to be Jam, put on a lot of concerts. They were a little corporate for us, but they had roots in the city. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering about places like Schubas, which I think got taken over. And what about Lincoln Hall? And even the new Salt Shed? Are those kind of corporate entities now?
They're still independent. They're not affiliated with like Live Nation or Ticketmaster or any of the corporations that tend to buy up venues. Salt Shed is basically, the Empty Bottle in Talia Hall. It's a company called 16 on Center. They do use Ticketmaster, but it's not. It is independent from the multinational corporations. Lincoln Hall and Schubas were bought out, but it's no longer owned by Mike Schuba. It's an independent company. It is not the sort of kind of spaces where it's Live Nation owned, where it means that only Live Nation kind of approved bands can play. And, the ticket prices are still reasonable at each of those venues. Even Salt Shed, which uses Ticketmaster, it's compared to other venues of that size, it's still relatively cheap. And, I think part of the reason why there's so many independent venues is that, there's a history of it. And there's also a culture where, the Lincoln Yards development that was threatening to take over the land that the hideout is on, there was major lobbying and civic kind of uprising against that move. Lincoln Yards is still sort of dead on arrival and the hideout still stands. And it was all these venues kind of banding together. They formed an organization called Civil that, was created to attempt to stop this development, to keep Chicago a thriving landscape for independent venues.
No, I like that. And, one venue that you haven't mentioned, but I've been to a few times and really liked is the Constellation.
Yeah, and Mike Reed does a fantastic job at that venue. I went to a show with your son maybe a couple months ago, Constellation. It's one of my favorite rooms. I think there's a chance I'll be going twice this week. There's an artist I know from Nashville named Michael Ruth. He performs as Rich Ruth, and he's a fantastic kind of experimental jazz rock musician. His music is sort of this mix of all these different genres I love. And he's his day job, he tours with country artists, but in his spare time, he makes this like really adventurous experimental jazz music. And he's playing on Thursday.
Let's talk a little bit about festivals. We've got Lollapalooza gets a lot of attention. There's also the Riot Fest question. They were going to move and now they're not. My sense from just what I heard around my own house a little bit, whether from my kid's mom or someone, that people were down on, the hipper people were down on Lollapalooza, and they had an alternative up in Wisconsin. And I know Lake J played up there. I wondered if you can shed any light on that. Is that a hipper thing to do during that time? Or
I don't know if I'm the right person to be the judge of what's hip or not, but I will say that we do have a lot of major festivals in Chicago, and the older I've gotten, the less I have been attending things like Lollapalooza, which it attracts hundreds of thousands of people. When you go, you have to walk like 5 to 10 miles a day because it's such a massive thing, and you're just crisscrossing through Grant Park to see the music that you want to see. But the older I get and the more my relationship with music has changed, the more I am interested in these kind of smaller showcases of talent. And whether that's a neighborhood festival, I live in Ukrainian Village, and I had a great time at West Fest. And I know in Rogers Park, there is the Glenwood Avenue Arts Fest. That's a fantastic place to see art and culture and live music. And obviously, there's kind of smaller festivals that have popped up that are like artist run, like Postdoc, which is from Seema Cunningham and is friends with Cadian and me and a lot of other people. There's Avram Farm Party, which I think was the one that Cadian played. That is also fantastic. And it's, it's kind of, they're all based in farms up in Wisconsin, and they're fantastic and really well curated. I think the thing is, music festivals are big business. Originally they're supposed to be, these kind of organic showcases of talent. And then as money has gotten in and tickets have been sold, it loses a little bit of its soul. And I think people have seen that once festivals become so big, alternatives are going to pop up. And that's how culture works. Woodstock was not the same as it was when it started out. It became a totally different thing. And imitators and people with better ideas have made their own versions of it since 1969.
Well, Josh, too, I want you to be a regular guest on this show talking about music, but I know you have other interests. And I see that you are a Bulls fan.
Oh, yes.
And I wonder what kind of optimism you might want to share. I don't know where you're at on the Sox, Cubs, if you like them both. I go with the White Sox mostly. Yeah. But I noticed that you're a Detroit Red Wings fan and not a Detroit Pistons fan or Detroit, I don't know where you're at in the Tigers. What else do you like? You on your No Expectations, you talk about not only venues, you talk about restaurants, fashion, natural wine, NASCAR, politics. You got 5 minutes. Share some information.
Oh, okay. So to explain the Detroit Red Wings thing, I am from Michigan. Both my parents are from Illinois, the Chicagoland area. So I was raised on the Bears, the Cubs, and the Bulls. My parents weren't really that into hockey. And in the 90s, it was sort of tough to watch the Blackhawks. So I just watched what was on TV, which was the Detroit Red Wings. And, it feels like a cop-out being kind of Chicago all the way, except for hockey.
But fair. It's okay.
Yeah, it's totally fine. I think, being someone who writes about music, you kind of have to develop a lot of interests, or else this one thing that you grew up loving is just going to become your job. You know what I mean? And I don't want to live life just being a fan of records and live music. I definitely am. But there's so much, I love sports. I love reading. I love going to the music box to see a bunch of movies. I think trying to keep a well-rounded bunch of interest is just sort of it's just what life's about. You kind of have to be curious about everything that you like and, feed that interest as long as possible.
Well, when you interviewed me, you did ask about restaurants and stuff. Like, you got a couple places you like to go to for either cheap or fancy food?
Yeah, I mean, so there are quite a few. Near me, I really like this Mexican place called Los Tres Compadres de Guerrero. It's this sort of family-run spot that's really, really excellent. On the fancier side, I did go to this restaurant called Maxwell's Trading in the West Loop, and I thought that was like one of the best, most thoughtful meals I've had in a long time. There's just so many good places in Chicago, and you could spend your entire life living here, trying new places and exploring, and you'll never really scratch the surface,
What's your take on NASCAR? Should we bring it back every year? I am a NASCAR fan, and I do think that it has been very, very fun to watch the races. And I do think that, you can have these. I enjoyed the races. I can't necessarily comment on the deal that Chicago got, which might be more of a question for former Mayor Lori Lightfoot. But I've had a great time watching the races. I got to cover a little bit and interview a driver for WTTW a couple months ago, and that was nice,
quite fun. Yeah, we drove along the track, and it was cool to talk racing with another driver.
You're having some great experiences, and I'm glad that you share them in your writing and the work you do. Now, let me just get it straight. How do people see the WTTW site that you're working for, the Daily Chicagoan? Can they get it online?
Yeah, you can. You just go to WTTW.com and there'll be a button for the newsletter. And the newsletter is the Daily Chicagoan. It runs Monday through Saturday. Sign up there. And I'm just so excited to be at WTTW with such an awesome team. And
that's great. And the No Expectations, how do they find that?
Yeah, so it's noexpectations.fyi. I could not afford a .com, so it'll be noexpectations.fyi is my personal newsletter, and that runs.
That's a new one on me, the FYI, but we'll talk about that another time. Josh Terry, I look forward to seeing you soon. I'm sure it won't be too long. You're a great interview. You shared a lot of information, answered a lot of questions, and probably inspire me to go out at night a little bit more than I do.
Sounds good, Michael. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. I want to thank everybody who made this show possible. I want to thank Emma Brown, who works in El Paso around immigration and people's rights. And I want to thank Josh Terry, one hell of a writer and a guy with a lot of knowledge for such a young fellow. And I want to certainly thank our producers, Tom Clark, Katie Hogan, Lynn Orman, and as much as anybody else, the young Hal James for being the engineer and putting this together every week. Whatever you do, wherever you're at, keep doing good in the world, because the world needs all the good that you do, that I do, that Josh does, that Emma does, that Hal does, that we all do. Together, we can make a difference. Over and out with a whole lot of all power to the people. We want to thank you for watching the Live from the Heartland show. New episodes air every Friday beginning at 9 a.m. Central Time. Episodes air each following Thursday on CAN TV, 9 p.m. in Sweet Home Chicago on Channel 21, or streaming everywhere else at cantv.org. Audio episodes go live on WLUW each Saturday, 9 a.m. on the left end of your dial at 88.7 FM, or streaming everywhere worldwide at WLUW.org. They're available on Apple and Spotify podcasts by looking up Live from the Heartland on either platform, and are also broadcast on Lumpen Radio each Friday at 9 a.m. on 105.5 FM and streaming at lumpenradio.com. I'm Michael James, and I'm glad to have been your host. Until next time, remember, Do good in the world because the world needs all the good that you do, that I do, that we do together. All power to the people. Over and out.
Come to Limbo. Are you doing the best you can? Tell me, are you doing